We live in a world where education has made us experts at accumulating knowledge. We learn mathematics, history, law, science, but we know almost nothing about the machinery of our own minds. How is perception formed and how do thoughts arise? How are beliefs reinforced? And this creates a paradox. We trust our thoughts completely, yet we rarely question how they are constructed. Two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different realities. That alone should make us question how objective our perception really is. But the deeper issue here lies in what education prioritizes. Our schools and our universities emphasize on external knowledge, facts, formulas, theories over our internal awareness. We become highly functional, able to solve problems, write reports, pass exams, but how many of us truly understand how our beliefs shape our decisions, how our emotions influence our actions, or how unconscious biases filter our reality? Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode with me, Ani. Today, we are diving into a topic that not always gets the attention it deserves, in my opinion, and how I'd like to call it the blind spot in modern education. Let me give you an example. Consider two students who both study history. One interprets a historical event as a tale of progress, and the other one sees it as the story of oppression. Both could be right, according to the facts, but their perceptions, shaped by internal biases and prior experiences, lead them to have an entirely different understanding of the same reality. Or think of a workplace. Two colleagues could be in the same meeting. One walks away feeling threatened and one walks away feeling absolutely inspired. Their internal narratives, their mind's interpretation creates a different world for each of them, even though the external reality was identical. So modern education gives us the tools to navigate the outer world beautifully, but leaves us gapping blind spots within and underdeveloped awareness of our own minds. And until we explore that inner landscape, we remain at the mercy of our unexamined assumptions and unconscious patterns. So in today's episode, we are looking at the modern education. The system we have inherited were never designed to cultivate self-awareness or independent thinking. The roots go back to the Industrial Revolution. Society suddenly needed a workforce that was disciplined, predictable, and capable of standardized output. Schools evolved to meet that demand. They adopted fixed schedules, hierarchical authorities, reward and punishment systems, and standardized testing. So every aspect was geared towards shaping behavior that was reliable, repeatable, and efficient. And here's the thing. These systems optimize for compliance, repetition, and efficiency, and not for questioning, reflecting on thought process, or understanding how perception shapes our realities. For example, a student can be praised and rewarded for providing the correct answer, the one that fits the expected patterns, but rarely, if ever, is the student rewarded for asking why the question is framed that way, or for challenging the assumptions that define what counts as an answer. I know this from my own childhood. I remember questioning the school programs, refusing just to follow along without understanding why. And instead of being supported, I was always punished, ignored, or made to feel like I didn't belong. So my curiosity, my need to think for myself, it was treated as a problem rather than a strength. I wasn't accepted because I didn't fit the mold that school wanted me to fit. And I had to suffer for years because I thought that I was the problem, but I wasn't. So this experience taught me early on how schooling values compliance over conscious thought. You learn how to arrive at answers, but rarely how to question the framework that defines what counts as an answer. So over time, we become highly skilled at following rules, but poorly trained at understanding the rules themselves. Modern schooling creates efficient minds, but often at the expense of truly conscious minds. And that's a blind spot many of us carry well into our adulthood, shaping how we make decisions, relate to others, and even see ourselves. Science is one of humanity's most powerful tools. There's no doubt about it. It was given us life-saving medicine, technology that connects the world, and insight into the universe. But here's something that often gets overlooked. Science doesn't operate in a vacuum. It works within a system of incentives and limitations that shape what we actually study and what we notice. Research depends on funding, institutional priorities, and whether a study is publishable or not. So these aren't flaws in scientists themselves, there are the structure within which science exists. And I've noticed this too. I remember that I was always fascinated by questions about consciousness and perception. And I was trying to dive into research that explored the inner working of the mind. But time and time again, I found very little support, few studies, and a lot of skepticism. It wasn't that the knowledge was intentionally hidden, it was simply that this area of inquiry wasn't prioritized or funded. So science is evolving and self-correcting, but it's not complete. There are vast areas like consciousness, subjective experiences, and how perception shapes our reality, where our understanding is still very limited. What becomes visible is often what gets studied, funded, rewarded, not necessarily what is most important to truly understand ourselves. So here's a line I want you to think about. It's not that knowledge is hidden in a dramatic sense, but what we study, fund, and prioritize shapes what becomes visible. And if you've ever felt frustrated searching for answers about mind or about yourself, you're not alone. Sometimes the biggest discoveries lie in the questions we've yet to given our attention to. I want to tell you something very interesting about our brains. Your brain doesn't passively receive reality. It actively predicts and constructs it. Every second, it generates models of the world, anticipating what will happen next. Incoming sensory data isn't simply recorded, it is constantly compared against these predictions. What you perceive is a mix of raw input and what your brain expects to see. You don't experience reality as it is, you experience reality as your brain predicts it to be. Consider emotional triggers. Someone ignores you. Instantly, you might think, oh, they don't respect me. That interpretation feels real, but it's filtered through your expectations and your past experiences. Another person in the same situation might say, oh, they must be busy. Same event, completely different reactions. So anxiety works the same way. If you are worried about money, suddenly every bill, every financial headline, every small risk stands out. Your brain filters reality to confirm its prediction. The world is unsafe. I don't have enough. The thing is that the environment hasn't changed, but your perception has. Memory and beliefs operate similarly. We don't recall events as they happened. We reconstruct them colored by expectations and assumptions. And over time, these reconstructions shape our worldview, your identity, even your emotional responses, creating patterns that feel entirely real but are largely predictive. So every perception, every emotion, every reaction is a construction, not a mirror. You are not a passive observer of life. You are a world builder, constantly predicting, filtering, and interpreting everything you experience. So I want you to remember this. Perception is not a mirror, it's a model. The more you understand this, the more you realize how much of reality is created from within, not simply received from outside. So, as I mentioned, what you pay attention to doesn't just shape your day, it shapes your reality you live in. Your brain filters millions of inputs every second and selects what matters. What you focus on becomes your experience, while everything else fades into the background. This creates attentional bias and confirmation bias, where your mind constantly validates what it expects or fears. Let me give you an example. You buy a new car and suddenly you see it everywhere. The world didn't change, your attention did. Emotional charge amplifies this effect. Fear, desire, or longing intensify what your brain notices, creating a version of reality that feels vivid and urgent. So, this filtering doesn't just shape individual perception, it has been manipulated socially, particularly against women. Research shows that attention and social conditioning have historically been used to teach women that their value is conditional, that they must behave, look, or act a certain way to be considered worthy. So, from an early age, girls are often subtly trained to monitor themselves, their behavior, and how others perceive them. And patriarchal structure amplify fear and desire, fear of rejection, desire for acceptance, all shaping attention and perception to conform rather than question. And reality is not just what exists, it's what your attention selects. And for women, much of that attention has been shaped by social structures telling them that they're not enough unless they perform, comply, or fit this little narrow mold. But you know what's interesting? Even when these patterns are clear, we rarely step back and question them. There are biological, psychological, and social reasons for this. So, biologically, the brain prefers efficiency. Following familiar pattern takes less energy than exploring new ways of thinking. Psychologically, uncertainty is uncomfortable, and questioning long-held beliefs about ourselves, our identity, our worth, our role feels threatening. And interestingly, patriarchy leverages these tendencies. From childhood, women are often rewarded for compliance and punished subtly or overtly for challenging authorities. Studies show that girls are more likely to prioritize others' needs over their own, to avoid conflict and to downplay ambitions, teaching that their value depends on external approval rather than their internal capabilities. And this makes questioning the system doubly difficult. It is not just our brain's natural tendencies, it is reinforced by decades of social conditioning and institutional reinforcement. Understanding these layers, biological, psychological, social, and gendered, reveals why many of us unconsciously accept patterns that limit our potentials. It also points the way towards conscious attention, choosing what to notice, which patterns to challenge, and which internal rules we actually want to follow. Now, language doesn't just describe reality, it shapes what we can even Think about the words and labels we use determine what is socially acceptable to question and what gets dismissed before it's over before it's even examined. Some ideas become socially risky to explore, not necessarily because they are false, but because they carry a social, political, or economic cost. For instance, during sensitive periods in history, institutions like CIA subtly influence public discourse, using labels and messaging to steer what ideas were considered credible. Terms like conspiracy theories are deployed not always to judge the truth, but to discourage questioning, to make curiosity costly. Consider the social dynamics. If someone raises an unusual hypothesis or challenges a dominant narrative, the first reaction from peers or institutions is often dismissal. This doesn't automatically mean the idea is wrong. It means that the culture and power structures have defined certain questions as off limits. Sometimes ideas are dismissed before they are even examined, not because they are false, again, because they carry a cost. And this is a profound reminder that social reality itself is curated. What we are allowed to explore is filtered by history, power, and perception. And when combined with attentional and predictive biases we discussed earlier, it becomes clear how deeply systems shape not just what we know, but what we think we're allowed to know. And I want you to remember that not all intelligence is analytical. Some of the most powerful ways we understand the world comes from our intuition, subconscious patterns, recognition built from accumulated experience. This type of intelligence is relational, contextual, and deeply tied to our perception, often developing outside formal structures that value measurable outputs. Yet, systems from education to corporate hierarchies tend to prioritize logic and quantifiable results. Institutions, relational awareness, and pattern recognition often associated historically with femininity. And they are undervalued precisely because they cannot be neatly measured or standardized. Think of a leader who senses the mood of the team without seeing a single chart, or an entrepreneur who intuitively knows which product will resonate based on subtle cultural cues. These abilities are just as real and sometimes more effective than analytical skills, but society trains us to value one over the other. And patriarchy has amplified this undervaluation. For centuries, women's intuition and relational intelligence was labeled as soft or less. So by ignoring these forms of intelligence, social systems limit both personal and collective potentials, and they condition women to chase external validation rather than that trust their inner knowing. So there is this unique power in observing your own mind. Metacognition, thinking about thinking, creates a space between experience and self. When you notice a thought, it stops being an identity and becomes an object of observation. So by observing the pattern, you are no longer fully inside it. You gain the ability to respond rather than react automatically. Science shows that this activates higher order cognition, reduces automatic reactivity, and strengthens self-regulation. It's like finding a glitch in the system of your mind, and once you see it, you can step out of that habitual loop and choose how to act rather than being driven by unseen forces. So this ties back to everything we've explored: attention, predictive processing, social conditioning, and undervalued forms of intelligence. Awareness is the tool that lets you see the filters, the labels, and assumptions shaping your reality. And it's also the path to reclaiming agency in a world designed to limit it. So, my lovely listeners, please remember that this isn't an abstract theory. It touches everything in life: how you make your decisions, the way you navigate your relationships, your sense of identity, your emotional reactions. All of it is influenced by these unseen patterns. Without awareness, you live inside inherited structures and social conditioning, reacting automatically to a world shaped by attention, perception, and expectations. With awareness, everything changes. You gain choice, you can notice the biases in your attention, the predictive models in your mind, the labels and social boundaries that shape what you believe is possible. So you don't need hidden knowledge in a dramatic sense. You just need to start noticing what feels automatic, because the moment you see that pattern, you begin to step outside of it. So I want to thank you for being here and for lending me your ears. If this episode resonated with you, please do like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts, because I appreciate them very, very much. Your awareness and your voice helps this idea ripple further. So until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and always go beyond the mind.